Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, this time around with a melee build. The idea around this build was to kind of just play some melee, since it is a pretty underrepresented archetype right now, as it has not really received any changes or buffs in recent times. The last large buffs and all that were to spells, specifically spell casting, self-casting that is, and also some bow shit. And melee, a lot of this shit hasn't seen any changes for like 6 months or whatever. And there's a few melee skills that are still kind of viable and have crept to the top, but the rest are more or less just not really looked at. I wanted to play some Perforate action, which is the skill you're seeing in the background right now, and I wanted to make sure it was going to be something that might have a chance of going through to Ubers, that sort of a thing. And I wanted to utilize the Saviour yet again, because it is a very fun item, and it's also cheap as fuck when I went and bought one for like 10C or some shit. So yes, Perforate, Saviour, Champion, with Impale as well. Yet another heavily underutilized thing right now, because it's just not very strong ever since the last round of nerfs to the Impale Gem, and other support gems, but specifically the Impale Gem lost quite a bit, and Impale does kind of suck a bit more than it used to, but we could still make it work, and it's still doable in today's day and age. So unfortunately, the bitrate for Perforate is terrible, because every single attack I do shoots out like 10 billion sand particles onto the screen, and that seems to just trash the bitrate. So the quality of the footage for this Perforate gameplay is always going to be rather bad, and there's nothing I can do about it. My apologies on that one. And that means I probably won't be playing skill for much longer, but we'll be trying to take it through to some endgame anyway. So Perforate itself has two variants, one in Sand Stance, just the big spikes you see all over the place, and then one in Blood Stance, which turns into just the single target version of the skill. Lots of little bleed spikes coming from the ground that, if you have the right boss or the right area on your skill, overlap nicely to give you huge single target. This character should hit something like 20 to 30 million DPS in its ideal state, and that's pretty good for Perforate on an okay budget. Like, we're talking the Saviour being worthless, my foil being a couple X, and then a few other pieces of gear that might total up like 5 to 10x, once again my usual budget, and a few niche items in this case too. Of course, we got ourselves some Abyssus action this time around, because it's a melee build. What would it be without an Abyssus? And I could definitely justify using it, since I'm using the Champion Ascendancy, which in my opinion way too tanky, so why not always run an Abyssus? The Champion here, yeah, it feels unethical. I'm doing the Perseverance stuff, so you got lots of armor, lots of evasion, and then using Perseverance Belt to get a bit of extra damage out of your defensive stats. Nothing too major in this version of the build. 40k armor, 40k evasion, so it's not quite as extreme as some other people are going with like 100k of each, for example, but still plenty to utilize the Perseverance and to also make the character thick. And as well as that, like I said, with Abyssus, with all of that thickness, it isn't really felt at all. Got 90 armor reduction, damage reduction, some shit like that. A pretty juiced Fortify, and a lot of evasion as well, and also blind on hit. And I've also tried to get a little bit of life gain on hit for sustain, since the single target portion of Perforate does overlap quite a lot, and thus life gain on hit is a fairly potent way of getting recovery back in this build. So barely just started to get to the end game, only 1 or 2 bosses down so far, or these guardians and stuff, just to test my single target for the purpose of something like this video, and it's gone relatively well. It is going to be probably a bit tough for some fights, because being melee, especially incredibly melee, which something like this will be, it's going to be very point blank in your face melee. It's going to be tough in the end game, but we'll have to wait and see how it goes. Champion has a good chance of face tanking just about everything, so maybe that'd help. Either way, Perforate so far not too bad. Let me go ahead and show you how I've built it. So here's our character, currently level 90. No one told me melee was bad, and as such, we went ahead and made a melee. So even though it doesn't have a lot of life, it doesn't need a lot of life. 3.8k at the moment. I mean, with just a few more levels, I can take it to 4.2 or so. And every point of this life counts for a lot of thickness when you are this kind of thick. So we're talking at the moment 36,000 armor, 31,000 evasion, and then with flasks up, 45,000 evasion, 38k armor, and perma fortify pretty much, whenever I attack. So almost all of the time, and it goes up to 24, I think, which is pretty good. Decent little chaos res, capped spell suppression with the flask, but it was kind of tough to get to this point to fine tune, given that I ended up using a pretty meme item in the form of Perfidy. So it's not something you'd see very often, or possibly ever, but I could justify it in this case because your banners, while scaling some aura effect and being a champion, are pretty damn good as an impale character. So I really didn't want to give up either Defiance or Dread banner, and I wanted to have both of them, and the only way to do that was for Perfidy. And basically, I had to have Dread banner, so Defiance would have been the one I'd drop. And if I dropped Defiance banner, I would then grab a chest that has some evasion, some spell suppress, all of that, and I'd be in a very similar position to what I am now with Defiance banner and using Perfidy. So that's how I justified it in the end. It's a very cheap chest and just a different way of building. Because as I said, if I went the other route, I'd be making up all of what Defiance banner gives in the form of a chest slot with a bit more evasion and a bit more life and some other aura effect and that sort of shit. It comes close in the end, basically. Perfidy with Defiance banner comes close to just a good chest, but saves me from having to make an actual good chest and also be able to showcase just a bit more of a different item that's kind of cheap and usable. And the 3D art for it's pretty cool too. And as well as that, it turns me into a banner lord because I've got 2 banners at all times just running around on my back. Which is not how it was intended because like they're stabbing through my chest and shit, but hey, whatever, looks kind of cool. So yeah, that's what we're going with. And then of course Saviour, every time you crit, you copy 2 clones of yourself and they'll attack the exact same way you do. So if you're in Sand Stance, I'll have Sand Stance attacks from Perforate. If in Blood Stance, they'll do the Blood Stance, and they swap immediately as you swap, which is pretty cool. And there's Perforate itself. Pretty simple thing, just, yeah, Sand Stance or Blood Stance. So it's a very nice way of solving the AoE/single target dilemma in Path of Exile, just being able to swap from stance to stance and your skill changes entirely. So it's always been kind of a cool skill, and only when it got a bit of a revamp a year or so after it came out did it really come into its own. But it's got a lot of flat fizz to begin with, and then has potential to be some of the highest single target for melee out there because of all the overlap. And as well as that, the Helman Shark can give you an additional 2 spikes. So you can have quite a lot of spikes with the proper overlap, meaning if all the overlap goes according to plan on a certain boss, then it is a lot of damage. We do currently have, for our clear setup though, Pulverize, so the more area you have, the wider the overlap's going to be. For single target, going to be swapping into Conk effect. Otherwise, using Close Combat, Multi-Strike with 10 attack speed, Brutality, and Ruthless at the moment. The foil here, paid 2x for, it's 500 DPS and has no crit, but yeah, you can make your own foils or just buy cheap as shit ones that no one cares about because it's a dead meta basically. The melee and attack based and dual wield sort of meta. But to justify that no crit, I am using the Slayer's Ascendancy Overwhelm. So these Forbidden Flames together cost, I don't know, like 50C, very cheap, and brings us up to 8 crit, as well as that gives a little bit of crit multi. So it's actually pretty good to steal that from the Slayer for 2 dual sockets. It's fairly cost effective for points, and yeah, that's why I had to squeeze a couple of dual sockets into this build very badly. And in general, I'm pretty not thrilled with my passive tree. I want so many things, and yet I'm not allowed to have them. Even just every individual life point right now gives me like an extra 150, 200 life or some shit because I got so little of it. But as a champion and as an Impale champion, I want so many points, and unfortunately I can't have them all. So I'm stretched a bit thin. We've got some crit, some sword, some fortify action, some resists and armor evasion and all that. Spell suppress, dual wield crit, a little bit of leech, and had to go up here for a 3-point duel because it did need some dexterity, and grab a Watcher's Eye with Impale on it. So the Impale inflicts 2 additional times. I've never actually used that before because it's always historically been way too expensive, though currently the way Impale is and melee is and all that, it's actually pretty cheap. Even managed to combine it with the suppress during grace for the cost of 3 exalts. There was 2 exalt ones, but they got bought out as I was talking about them. So otherwise, yeah, Impales inflict 2 additional is pretty damn cheap by itself. It's like 80 to 100 C, I think, some shit like that. So you can typically combine it with something else right now even. And yeah, other than that, I don't know what to say. Perseverance, so you got yourself the belt that just gives you damage for lowest armor evasion, and typically you're going to squeeze like 200% damage out of this thing to really utilize it, and I think that's roughly where I'm at. Otherwise, went some life gain hit, reused the ring from my previous character, slammed it with an exalt, or a bestiary hunter slam, got chaos res on it, and then been trying to make another ring. So far this is the best I've got, just for some life gain on hit, but gonna try and make another one anyway. Did use some, bought these gloves for 100 C, sorry, just suppress and attack speed, and then use some recombinators to make these boots for like 20 C, so just smash some fire and lightning together onto a pair of new boots, and then basically just use a few greed forces till I hit spell suppress, and that's what happened there. And then recombinated another couple amulets with just fractured fizz and multi. Had to do it 2 or 3 times, I think, so in the end, I don't know, like 50 C or some shit, and put those together and then just rolled something. I need some stats, and that's where we're at. So just some life and then all of that, and yeah, bit of leech as a prefix at the moment, but I'm gonna try and see if I can get rid of that. If I can get a little bit of leech on a ring, then I can craft minus mana cost here instead, or vice versa. If I can finish off an entirely nice ring here, some minus mana cost would be pretty cool. So otherwise, what else we got? Defiance banner attached to Arrogance and Dread banner. So Arrogance makes it reserve life instead, but since you're a champion, it's completely free, so you can just use the 24% aura effect buff. We got Protector, War Chief, Multi-Totem, and Maim up here. Got a Molten Shell, which is huge extra damage reduction with all the armor you've got. Determination and Grace. Then Leap Slam, Assassin Mark, Life Tap, and Mark on Hit. So that's our Mark on Hit setup. And down here is Pride, Life Tap, Divine Blessing, and Blood and Sand. So that's Pride, which is just going to be a temporary buff based off a Divine Blessing. And thanks to this node over here, if you get below half life, then you also proc Adrenaline. So before you go into a fight, you can definitely just press that twice, and boom, Adrenaline. And that's a large buff, basically. I would do more shit if I had more available sockets, but I'm very tightly squeezed for sockets on this build, and as such, can't grab like Blood Rage, can't attach increased duration to this. Plenty of stuff I would love to do, but can't because of these sockets. So it's a bit of a tight squeeze fitting this build in, just kind of proving that melee out there is still doable, or hoping to prove that with Ubers and all that, and a bit of a self-inflicted challenge. It's not a bad character to copy, like it feels pretty good being this thick as a champion, even within Abysses. But I don't know, nothing too special about the Perforate playstyle in modern day PoE, and you will start to feel pretty melee when you're actually like running around being a melee right now. Against some arch nemesis shit and various boss fights. But definitely not bad so far. Hopefully in the next video got some good news about endgame and all that. But for now, thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.